Here's some footage from a disturbing VHS called Grave Robbing for Morons that began circulating underground sometime around the late 1980s or early 1990s. In the film, a man calling himself Anthony sits with what appears to be a real human skull and casually explains how to dig up bodies, remove flesh from bones, sell human remains, and avoid getting caught. He claims to have accomplices, talks about targeting Harry Houdini's grave, and speaks as though he's describing techniques learned through first-hand experience. Despite showing his face and voice on camera for nearly half an hour, more than 30 years later, nobody has conclusively proven who he was. In 2019, the St. Louis Bail Project paid $5,000 to free Samuel Lee Scott after he was jailed for allegedly assaulting his wife, Marcia Johnson. Scott was also under an order of protection barring him from going near her, but immediately after his release, he returned to her home and brutally beat her to death. Scott was eventually convicted of first-degree murder, first-degree assault, and violating the protection order, receiving a mandatory sentence of life in prison without parole. The nonprofit that helped free him later apologized and said it was unaware of the protective order when it posted his bail. Convicted double murderer Wade Wilson became the center of a bizarre online fan craze after killing 2 women in Florida in 2019. He strangled Christine Melton in her sleep after a one-night stand, stole her car, then lured Diane Ruiz inside by asking for directions before strangling her, dumping her body, and repeatedly running her over upon realizing she was still alive. Despite this, Wilson developed a huge female fan base after his 2024 conviction, receiving thousands of messages and hundreds of photos in a single month. Some admirers called themselves Wade's wives, begged to have his babies, and even bought him courtroom clothes, while supporters also raised tens of thousands of dollars connected to his legal defense and pleaded with the judge to spare his life. Wilson was ultimately convicted of both murders and sentenced to death. A woman who lost her arm to cancer decided to hold a funeral for it rather than let it disappear as medical waste. Surrounded by loved ones, she mourned the limb she'd lived with for 22 years, remembering everything from playing music to holding hands and caring for pets. She even thanked her arm for its ultimate sacrifice in helping to save her life. In 2006, 17-year-old Liam Ashley's parents asked a New Zealand court to keep him in custody after he stole their car, hoping it would teach him a valuable lesson. Instead, he was transported inside a prison van with a violent offender who beat and strangled him to death. Liam's parents later blamed an incompetent corrections system, saying they had trusted authorities to protect their son and never imagined their attempt to teach him a lesson would get him killed. Farrah Fawcett's only child, Redmond O'Neill, has lived an incredibly troubled life. He struggled with addiction from a young age, cycled through numerous rehab programs, and was incarcerated while Farrah was dying of cancer in 2009. He was temporarily released under guard to visit her and later attended her funeral in shackles. In 2018, prosecutors accused him of a violent LA crime spree involving robbery, stabbing, and attempted murder. He was later ruled incompetent to stand trial and spent years at California's Patton State Hospital receiving psychiatric treatment. By 2026, his conservator said he'd been drug-free for about 5 years, but he was ruled competent to face the charges again, appearing in court with large devil horn tattoos on his forehead. In 2023, 71-year-old Joao Pimenta da Silva reportedly became obsessed with a recurring dream in which a spirit told him gold was buried beneath his home in Brazil. Convinced the message was real, he began tearing through his own kitchen floor, hiring workers, and digging a shaft that eventually reached 130 feet deep. As the hole grew, so did his obsession, and he reportedly poured his life savings into the search. Then in January 2024, after more than a year of digging, Joao slipped from a wooden platform and plunged to the bottom of the narrow shaft. He suffered devastating injuries and died inside the same hole he believed would make him rich, with no gold ever found. This white lioness is going viral for her unusually long eyelashes, giving her a striking appearance rarely seen even among lions. White lions are not actually albinos, they're born with a rare genetic condition called leucism, which reduces pigmentation while preserving natural eye color. With only a few hundred white lions believed to exist worldwide, they're already extremely rare, but this lioness's distinct features have made her stand out even among her own kind. This clear photo was taken on the surface of asteroid Ryugu, nearly 200 million miles from Earth. In 2018, Japan's Hayabusa 2 mission dropped a small probe called Mascot onto the asteroid, where it bounced across the rocky surface before landing inside a dark crater. The probe only survived for about 17 hours before its battery died, but not before capturing some of the clearest images ever taken on an asteroid's surface. This incredible photo shows a row of trees at Slope Point, the southernmost tip of New Zealand's South Island, permanently bent by some of the harshest winds on Earth. Powerful air currents sweeping in from the Southern Ocean hit the area so consistently that the trees grow almost completely sideways, with their branches forced in the direction of the wind. It's one of the only places on Earth where trees are shaped this dramatically over decades by relentless winds. This eerie photograph may show an animal thought to be extinct for nearly a century. The Japanese wolf was declared extinct in 1905, but in 1996, photographer Hiroshi Yagi captured 19 photos of a strange wolf-like animal in Chichibu. Experts noted similarities to extinct Japanese wolves, but without DNA, the animal's identity was never confirmed. Drake and Josh came to an abrupt end because Crazy Steve murdered Josh along with his parents and kidnapped Megan. He then fled with her to Seattle, changed their identities, and gave her Stockholm Syndrome, while brainwashing her into believing that they were siblings and their father was lost at sea. Crazy Steve was only crazy as a result of years of being neglected by his own family, but Carly helped fill in this void, allowing Steve to act far more sane while reigniting his passion for art. Crazy Steve also attempted to murder Drake and he survived, but suffered from serious brain damage and amnesia as a result of the attack. This is why when Drake visits Carly in iCarly, he asks her,
"Where's Josh? Where's Mama?"
Carly triggered the memory of his family, but he couldn't remember what happened to them. Eventually, someone recognizes Carly from her web show, finally prompting the arrest of mass murderer Crazy Steve. This is why Crazy Steve can be seen in a mental asylum in the iCarly spin-off Sam and Cat. In November of 2020, 80-year-old Paulette Landreau, who suffered from Alzheimer's disease, suddenly disappeared from her home in Belgium. Despite helicopters, thermal cams, tracking dogs, and massive search efforts, she seemed to vanish without a trace. But 2 years later, a Google Street View image taken on the day she disappeared was discovered showing her walking toward a neighboring property. Police retraced her final steps and found her remains hidden beneath dense shrubs at the bottom of a steep embankment just yards from where she was last seen. Investigators found no evidence of foul play, concluding she had most likely suffered a fatal accidental fall. In 2017, 16-year-old Davis Allen Kripe suddenly collapsed and died after drinking a large caffeinated latte, a Mountain Dew, and 2 energy drinks within 2 hours. According to the coroner, the rapid caffeine intake triggered a fatal heart rhythm disturbance. Although the total caffeine wasn't considered unusually high for an adult, officials said drinking it all within such a short period completely overwhelmed his body. In 886, Byzantine Emperor Basil I was hunting when his belt suddenly became tangled in a stag's antlers, causing the terrified animal to drag him roughly 16 miles through the wilderness. By the time he was finally freed, he had suffered catastrophic internal injuries, broken bones, and severe trauma across most of his body. Basil lingered in agony for several days before finally dying from his injuries. Stormy Jones suffered from a rare genetic condition where her liver was unable to remove cholesterol, raising her cholesterol to 7 times the normal level for her age and resulting in 2 heart attacks before she turned 6. In 1984, she became the world's first successful recipient of a simultaneous heart and liver transplant. Her life was miraculously extended by another 7 years, but she tragically passed away in 1990 at the age of 13. Taylor Mitchell was a 19-year-old folk musician from Canada who was attacked and killed by 2 coyotes during a hike in 2009. She is currently the only documented adult to have been killed by coyotes. After President John Adams' daughter Abigail was diagnosed with breast cancer, she had a mastectomy performed on her with a fork, wooden razor, and a spatula. Without anesthesia, the breast was fully removed, only to reveal that the cancer had spread to her lymph nodes. So the doctors had to slice out those tumors as well. To stop the bleeding, the wound was cauterized using the heated spatula, and the entire surgery only took about 25 minutes. Everyone was amazed that she never cried out in pain during the brutal operation, but she tragically died from the same cancer just 2 years later. If you ever see this in the wild, you're already in big trouble. Caught on a trail cam, this video shows a skunk performing one of nature's most unmistakable warning displays. Before spraying, skunks often stomp their feet, hiss, raise their tail into a massive plume, and may even stand on their front legs in a final attempt to intimidate predators and avoid wasting their spray. If these warnings are ignored, they can accurately spray a foul-smelling liquid up to 15 feet, temporarily blind anything that gets it in its eyes, and leave an overpowering odor that can linger for days. A Chinese ghost hunting influencer who built her following by challenging spirits and mocking superstition has died. Zhang Xiaorou gained around 1.3 million followers by exploring abandoned places and attempting to disprove supernatural beliefs. In one of her most controversial stunts, she deliberately destroyed a statue of Guan Yin, the Buddhist goddess of mercy, to see whether she would be cursed. She even joked about it afterward, telling viewers to subscribe to see how long I live. Roughly a year later, the 24-year-old was critically injured in a car crash, suffering severe brain injuries and organ damage. She remained in a coma for nearly a month before dying in August of 2026. After her death, the old footage and her eerie comments resurfaced, with viewers claiming the curse had finally caught up with her. In 2021, 5-year-old Oakley Carlson disappeared from her Washington home, but incredibly, her parents never reported her missing. Months later, during a sleepover, Oakley's 6-year-old sister told her school principal's daughter, "Oakley is no more, and there is no Oakley." Alarmed by what she heard, the principal immediately contacted authorities. During a later interview, Oakley's sister reportedly said her mother had forbidden her from talking about Oakley and claimed she had gone into the woods and been eaten by wolves. Investigators discovered no one outside her parents had confirmed seeing Oakley for months. Her siblings also alleged she'd been beaten, starved, and locked beneath the stairs. Oakley has never been found, and neither parent has been charged in her disappearance. This 1982 photograph captured 18-year-old Patty Gifford celebrating New Year's Eve in Fort Lauderdale just hours before she would disappear forever. The man standing behind her was 22-year-old Dennis Sokor, who prosecutors said kidnapped, raped, and strangled her after she rejected his sexual advances later that night. Patty's friend unknowingly photographed him in the background, creating the image that ultimately helped investigators identify her killer after he fled the state. Sokor later confessed to the murder, though he never revealed where he dumped her body, leaving Patty's family without a grave for more than 4 decades. Her boyfriend never married, hoping she'd one day be found so they could be buried together, but he died in 2020 before that wish could be fulfilled. On July 14, 2026, after spending nearly 40 years on Florida's death row, Sokor was executed, apologizing for his crimes in his final statement, while Patty's remains are still missing. The disturbing case of Gene Hackman and his wife just keeps getting weirder. If you haven't been following along, 95-year-old actor Gene Hackman and his wife Betsy, along with one of their dogs, were found dead in their New Mexico home on February 26th. The bodies were found in separate rooms and both showed signs of mummification. The investigation found that Gene appeared to have collapsed near the kitchen, while his wife was found in a bathroom next to an open bottle of prescription meds, with many concluding they both passed from carbon monoxide poisoning as no foul play was suspected. But just today, the chief medical examiner announced that it's reasonable to assume that Betsy died 7 days before her husband did. Her official cause of death was hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, a respiratory illness that's transferred from rodents to humans. Gene died of cardiovascular disease with Alzheimer's as a significant contributory factor. The details still remain unclear, but it's suspected that Betsy suddenly passed away from the rare illness, leaving Gene without a caretaker to administer his meds, resulting in his tragic death 7 days later. When he was a young boy, actor Terrence Howard witnessed his dad stab a man to death while they were waiting in line to take pictures with Santa Claus at a department store in what became known as the Santa line slaying. The victim, who was also with his family, reportedly made a racist comment to Terrence's father Tyrone after he thought he cut the line, which quickly escalated to a fatal fight. Tyrone was arrested and pleaded self-defense since the other man attacked first and was sentenced to 11 months in prison. After a deadly Peruvian avalanche in 1962, 2 American climbers traveled down to investigate and later warned Peruvian authorities that there is a threat of a much larger avalanche just waiting to happen. These warnings were not only ignored but actively suppressed by the Peruvian government, as the climbers were accused of fear-mongering and anyone who even mentioned their research was arrested. 8 years later, the deadliest avalanche in history occurred there, completely destroying the town of Yungay while killing over 30,000 people. Virginia Giuffre became one of the most prominent victims of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell when she fearlessly accused Epstein and Prince Andrew of repeatedly sexually assaulting her when she was a teenager in the early 2000s. But just today, the 41-year-old mother of three reportedly posted on Instagram claiming she only has 4 days to live after her car was struck by a school bus. Along with an image of her appearing badly bruised, Virginia wrote, "This year has been the worst start to a new year." I won't bore anyone with the details, but I think it's important to note that when a school bus driver comes at you driving 110 kilometers per hour, that no matter what your car is made of, it might as well be a tin can. I've gone into kidney renal failure and they've given me 4 days to live. I'm ready to go, just not until I see my babies one last time. The post has left people asking many questions, with some believing it to be a sick April Fool's joke or a cover-up for the fact that she was actually murdered. In 2013, Rain Periwinkle was shopping for clothes at the dollar store with her 3 daughters when an older man named Donald Smith approached them and offered to buy them all clothes at Walmart. Desperate for the favor, the family got into his van and shopped with him for the next 2 hours. At some point, Smith offered to buy them burgers at the in-store McDonald's, and Rain's 8-year-old daughter Cherish went with him. But after they didn't return for more than 30 minutes, Rain called police, who were immediately concerned. It turned out that Smith was known to police as a local sex offender with a long criminal history of assaults, and he'd just been released from prison 3 weeks prior. The next morning, Cherish's lifeless body was found in a nearby creek. It's believed that Smith bound her in the back of his van before assaulting and strangling her to death. During Smith's trial, the jurors were in tears after being shown the crime scene photos, and even the medical examiner had to request a break. The 56-year-old Florida man was eventually sentenced to death for the heinous murder. In 1983, Carla Faye Tucker murdered a couple with a pickaxe while attempting to rob them, striking each of them more than 20 times and later saying she felt a sexual thrill with each blow. Tucker was sentenced to death for her crimes, but after converting to Christianity during her time in prison, there was a worldwide campaign to spare her life, even involving Pope John Paul II and the brother of one of her victims. However, Texas Governor George Bush ultimately blocked the appeal, saying, "The gender of the murderer did not make a difference to the victims," and Tucker was executed by lethal injection in 1998. South Carolina woman Mary Wilson was using her blow dryer when she suddenly passed out with her hand on top of it. The dryer continued blowing hot air directly onto her skin for at least 20 minutes, causing third-degree burns all the way to the bone. Wilson was rushed to the hospital, where doctors found nerve damage so severe they had to amputate her entire hand. The yellow outline is the size of SeaWorld's parking lot. The green dot is where orcas will spend their entire lives. In 2009, 25-year-old Antoinette Davis told police her 5-year-old daughter Shania had been kidnapped. Security footage showed Shania being carried to a nearby hotel room by a man who was identified as Mario McNeil, the ex-boyfriend of Antoinette's sister. When authorities conducted a follow-up interview with Antoinette, her story changed to something much darker. She admitted she had sold Shania to the man who was her drug dealer, merely to settle a $200 debt. To the shock of the officers, Antoinette disturbingly told them he was only supposed to have S with her. McNeil had lent Davis the money to help her pay for a hotel room, and eventually told her he either wanted his money or sex, so Antoinette offered her 5-year-old daughter. McNeil was eventually apprehended after Shania's body was found on the side of the road several days after he smothered her to death. McNeil was sentenced to death, while Antoinette received 17 years in prison and is set to be released in 2026. During the recent earthquakes in Venezuela, security cameras captured a terrifying race against time. Several people can be seen sprinting down the final flights of stairs as the building starts shaking violently. Seconds later, the entire structure starts collapsing behind them, reducing it to a massive pile of rubble as they escaped by mere moments. The powerful earthquakes caused widespread devastation across the country, destroying thousands of buildings and leaving more than 1,000 people dead, with many more displaced or injured. This was the moment a man was in serious danger of becoming a polar bear's next meal. After spotting the massive predator charging toward him, he sprinted for his snowmobile as the bear rapidly closed the distance. Just as he managed to start the engine, the roar of the snowmobile made the bear hesitate for just a split second. That brief pause gave him just enough time to speed away to safety. Polar bears are the only bears known to actively stalk and hunt humans as prey, making encounters like this among the most dangerous in the animal kingdom. This was the moment a diver tried to catch a crab and instantly regretted it. The diver used a pair of tongs to grab a smooth box crab on the seafloor, but before he could take her away, another crab emerged from the seabed and clamped onto her, refusing to let go. Smooth box crabs are known for protecting their partners. When danger appears, mates will often pick up their mates and carry them to safety, hiding them beneath the sand before attempting to defend them from whatever threat remains. Realizing he was watching a mate trying to protect his partner, the diver decided not to separate them. He even rewarded the loving pair with a piece of fish before swimming away. After a bird lost its ability to fly, its owner built a tiny transparent cabin beneath the drone so it could be carried through the air. Videos showed the bird riding inside the custom enclosure as the drone drifted off, allowing it to experience the sky again despite being unable to use its wings. In 2019, a man attempted to rob UFC fighter Poliana Viana while she waited for an Uber in Rio de Janeiro, but she quickly fought back, landing 2 punches and a kick before pinning him down with a rear naked choke until police arrived. The would-be robber was later taken into custody after receiving treatment for his injuries. Cosplayer Mary Ann Oliver Snow, aka Yandere Freak, had built an online audience of more than 1.6 million followers before a single mistake changed everything. During a night of drinking with friends in 2021, she handled a handgun that she believed was unloaded after removing the magazine. When her friend Hannah Rose Hastings jokingly said, "Shoot me," Mary Ann pointed the gun at her and pulled the trigger, unaware a live round was still in the chamber. Helen was killed instantly. Mary Ann was charged with manslaughter, but later reached a plea deal that allowed her to avoid prison time. Instead, she was sentenced to 10 years of probation. Prosecutors allege Los Angeles man Raheem Powell used this incredibly lifelike silicone mask to disguise himself as a white man while using dating apps to lure gay men to isolated locations. He's accused of murdering one man in 2021, is charged in the connection of another man who disappeared in 2023, whose car was later found in Powell's garage, and allegedly kidnapped, robbed, and ran over a third victim who survived and later identified him to police. Investigators say the realistic mask allowed Powell to hide his identity in plain sight, and he now faces multiple murder, attempted murder, kidnapping, and robbery charges. Iconic actor Jack Nicholson has faced his fair share of legal controversies over the years. In 1996, he reportedly assaulted an unnamed Hollywood socialite at a party and ruptured her breast implants. Then that same year, he allegedly promised a prostitute named Catherine Sheehan $1,000 for sex and then assaulted her when she asked for the money. Sheehan claimed that Nicholson promptly grabbed her by the hair, thumped her head on the floor, and then threw her out of his house. She received a $40,000 settlement, but later argued that this was insufficient to cover her injuries, including brain damage, which she said was actually killing her. In 1849, Henry Box Brown escaped from slavery by shipping himself in a small wooden crate from Virginia to Philadelphia. Despite the instructions on the box of handle with care and this side up, carriers placed the box upside down or handled it roughly several times. 350 miles and 27 brutal hours later, Brown stepped out of the box a free man and went on to become a magician. When later asked why he went to such an extreme to escape slavery, Brown was quoted saying, "If you've ever been deprived of liberty as I was, you cannot realize the power of that hope of freedom." When Robin Williams appeared on the Inside Actors studio in 2001, an audience member laughed so hard at one of his jokes that he developed a hernia and had to be rushed to the hospital in an ambulance. In 2012, a movie theater in Beirut was raided for showing K-porn, and 36 men were arrested and subjected to anal examinations to determine their sexual orientation. In Lebanon, people can be charged with intercourse contrary to nature, specifically intercourse that involves anal penetration, and can receive up to a year in prison. In the past few decades, some morbidly obese patients have been sent to zoos for MRI and CT scans because standard hospital machines can't accommodate their weight. Zoos have bigger machines designed for large animals, making them practical solutions in these extreme cases. Chicago's Iroquois Theater was advertised as absolutely fireproof when it first opened in 1903, but the building only lasted 37 days before being destroyed by a massive fire that killed 602 people, in the deadliest single-building disaster in the United States until 9/11. Last year, Wisconsin elementary school teacher Madison Bergman faced 10 felony charges for having an inappropriate relationship with her 5th grade student. Investigators were shown disturbing screenshots of their text conversations. in which Bergman would talk about how much she enjoyed making out with the young student. The two also exchanged over 100 letters, love notes, and artwork over several months. She was reportedly still graping him up to 3 months before she was supposed to get married to her fiancé. Bergman has pleaded not guilty to all 10 counts. Ohio sex worker Linda Lassess prompted a multi-state public health alert after police discovered she'd slept with more than 200 clients while knowing she was HIV positive. Officers worked hard to contact her clients and suggest getting tested so they could seek the proper treatment. Randy Woodfield was drafted by the NFL to play for the Green Bay Packers in 1974, but was soon cut from the team due to a series of indecent exposure arrests. He would go on to become the I-5 killer and is believed to have been responsible for over 40 murders throughout the early 1980s. In 2010, University of Alabama Huntsman professor Dr. Amy Bishop was at a biology department meeting when she pulled out a handgun. A witness said that she got up suddenly, pulled out a gun, and started shooting each one of us. She started with the one closest to her and went down the row shooting her targets in the head. This wasn't random shooting around the room. This was execution style. Amy killed 3 of her colleagues and injured 3 others before her gun jammed, forcing her to surrender. During the investigation, it was found that Amy had shot and killed her brother in 1986, but was never charged since the death was ruled an accident. She was also questioned after a 1993 pipe bomb incident that was directed at her lab supervisor. And in another previous incident, she punched a woman in the face for taking the last available booster seat at an IHOP. Along with obvious mental health problems, Bishop was apparently motivated to murder her colleagues after the university denied her tenure. She was eventually sentenced to life in prison. In 2021, Lady Gaga's dog walker Ryan Fisher was walking 3 of her French bulldogs in Hollywood when he was suddenly attacked by 2 men. After being shot in the chest, which resulted in permanent damage including the partial loss of a lung, he still tried to protect the dogs, but 2 of them were taken. Gaga later offered a $500K reward for the return of her pets, and 2 days later, a woman brought the dogs to an LA police station. The woman was later arrested along with 4 others in connection with the crime and tried to sue Gaga for not paying the reward money, asking for the $500K plus another $15 million for financial damages, pain and suffering, mental anguish, loss of enjoyment of life, and legal fees. She claimed that she never would have returned the dogs if not for the promised reward, and was therefore defrauded because she ended up with no dogs and no reward. The woman ended up losing the case, while shooter James Jackson pleaded no contest to attempted murder and was sentenced to 21 years in prison. Ever since Kurt Cobain turned the gun on himself in 1994, fans have speculated that he was actually murdered by his wife, Courtney Love. This was fueled by the fact that Courtney's own private investigator, Tom Grant, who she hired to find Cobain when he escaped from rehab, genuinely believes that she killed Kurt. For starters, Grant notes that Cobain injected himself with such a large dose of heroin before his death that there's no way he would have been able to pull the trigger. Grant also believes Cobain's note was doctored by Love to make it appear as a suicide note. Additionally, there was a lack of fingerprints from Kurt or others at the scene, suggesting that they may have been carefully removed to hide someone else's evidence. Grant also asserts that Love had a financial motive to kill Cobain, considering Kurt was planning to divorce her. Perhaps most shockingly, Kurt Cobain's own grandfather, Leland Cobain, believed that Kurt had been murdered, and he reportedly held this belief for the rest of his life until he died in 2014. 20-year-old Ukrainian OF model Maria Kovalchuk had been missing for 10 days until she was recently found severely injured and dumped on the side of the road in Dubai. She disappeared after telling her friends she was invited to a Dubai hotel party by 2 men who said they were representatives of the modeling business, and her loved ones became worried when she didn't return home on her scheduled flight 2 days later. Maria was initially thought to be dead when she was found laying on the side of the road with severe injuries including a broken spine and multiple broken limbs. She was rushed to the hospital and immediately required 4 surgeries to save her life. A police investigation revealed that she reportedly sustained the injuries after entering a restricted construction site by herself and falling from a height. However, Maria's family have disputed this account, believing that the construction site story is a cover-up for something darker. According to reports, the model currently can't speak but is expected to eventually recover. This woman went to the absolute extreme just to cheat on her husband. In 2016, California woman Sherry Papini suddenly vanished after going out for a jog. Just as her husband and 2 little kids were losing hope, 3 weeks later, Sherry was miraculously found alive by the side of a highway. She was tied up with a bag over her head, had a broken nose, was badly emaciated, and covered in bruises. Sherry claimed that 2 Hispanic women had abducted and tortured her, but she was never able to see their faces. The local community quickly rallied behind her, even offering donations to aid in her recovery. But behind the scenes, law enforcement was skeptical of Sherry's claims. They eventually found DNA on her clothing that matched her ex-boyfriend James Reyes, who had no choice but to admit that the story was a complete hoax. Papini had faked a kidnapping, severely beat herself up, and lied to federal agents, all just to spend time with her ex-boyfriend without her family finding out. Her husband divorced her the day she was arrested, while she was sentenced to 18 months in prison in order to pay $300K to the state. When the 2-year-old daughter of Chelsea Camp was being mauled by a vicious pit bull, the Texas mother had to act fast. She jumped on the dog's back and bit off its ear before shoving her fist down its throat to save her little girl. Both suffered serious wounds from the dog, which belonged to Chelsea's boyfriend and was normally very friendly, but suddenly turned on the toddler. The pit bull was still attacking when police arrived and had to be euthanized. In 2007, a Rhode Island hospital was fined $50,000 and reprimanded by the State Department of Health after brain surgeries were performed on the wrong side of the patient's head 3 separate times in the same year. During the mating process, dogs and other canines get stuck together for anywhere from 5 minutes to an hour. It's a natural physical mechanism called a copulatory tie where both of their genitalia interlock to ensure fertilization. The first time dogs mate, they're often surprised by this and show signs of distress while trying to pull away or run. A man from Vietnam had endured severe headaches for 5 months before finally going to the hospital. After a CT scan, the man and his doctors were shocked to find that a pair of chopsticks were lodged in his skull. It turned out that the man had been involved in a drunken fight 5 months prior that he barely remembered, and somehow ended up with chopsticks deep up his nose as a result. In 2021, YouTube prankster Timothy Wilkes had approached a group of strangers in a Nashville parking lot while carrying a butcher knife. He was apparently staging a fake robbery to see how people would react, but was almost immediately shot and killed by David Starnes Jr., who said he was unaware that he was being pranked and fired in self-defense. No one was charged. In 2012, Montana man Randy Lee Tenley was trying to spark reported sightings of Bigfoot by dressing up in a ghillie suit and standing in the middle of a highway. He tragically ended up being struck by 2 different cars and was pronounced dead at the scene. In 1996, the captain and flight engineer of a Colombian cargo flight decided to prank their novice first officer by giving him control of the plane after shutting off 2 engines. The plane stalled immediately after takeoff and crashed into a neighborhood, killing 22 people, including several children who were playing soccer on the ground. When Greg Gingrich took his daughter to the Grand Canyon in 1992, he thought it would be hilarious to pretend that he was falling. So he climbed over the barrier and windmilled his arms before losing his footing, causing him to actually plummet 400 feet to his death while his young daughter watched in horror. In 2012, an Indian nurse who was the caretaker for the Duchess of Cambridge was prank called by an Australian radio station pretending to be the Queen. This led to her revealing confidential information that ended up being broadcast on the radio. 3 days later, the nurse took her own life. Known for his sense of humor, Italian pro soccer player Luciano Riccone took one joke just a little too far in 1977. He decided to fake a robbery at his friend's jewelry shop in Rome, unaware of the fact that the shop was actually robbed just 2 weeks prior and the owner was still paranoid. Luciano ran into the store yelling, "Stop, this is a robbery," while covering his face. Unfortunately, his friend acted quickly and shot Riccone directly in the chest with a shotgun. And the man's final words were, "It's just a joke." Here's a photo of some children who were part of the 1980s Australian cult called The Family. The group was run by Anne Hamilton Byrne, who believed she was Jesus, and illegally adopted 28 children before raising them in total isolation. All were given the surname Hamilton Byrne, the same clothing, and the same haircut and dyed hair color. The kids were imprisoned, routinely drugged with LSD, and brainwashed into believing that Anne was their real mother. They were denied nearly all access to the outside world and subjected to a strict discipline that included starvation diets and frequent beatings. During all of this, the children were told that they were part of a chosen group of superior beings who would survive an impending apocalypse and eventually rebuild and lead the new world. The compound was eventually raided in 1987 after a member escaped and blew the whistle on the cult, but Anne managed to avoid jail time, only paying a measly $5,000 fine due to a lack of concrete evidence. On a cold winter night in 1977, 48-year-old Teresita Bassa was found brutally murdered in her Chicago apartment. Her body had been left naked under a burning mattress with a knife still embedded in her chest. The case quickly went cold with no suspects and no apparent motive, until months later when police received a chilling phone call. A local man claimed that his wife, who had worked with Teresita, began channeling messages from Teresita's ghost during trance-like states. During these eerie episodes, the woman would apparently speak in Teresita's voice, identifying her killer as a man named Alan Showery. Even more disturbingly, the alleged spirit named stolen items that were taken from her apartment, including specific pieces of jewelry that Showery had stolen from her. As absurd as it sounded, police followed these clues, and shockingly, they all checked out. Showery was arrested and eventually confessed, making this one of the most bizarre criminal cases in modern history. In 1988, Iranian man Mehran Karimi Nasiri was traveling to the UK when his briefcase containing essential refugee documents was stolen from him at a Paris train station. Unable to prove his identity to British immigration officials, Nasiri was returned to France and found himself completely stranded in Terminal 1 of Paris's main airport. He remained there for an astonishing 18 years, during which he became a fixture in the terminal, residing on a red bench surrounded by his belongings, writing in his diary, and engaging with airport staff and travelers. In 2006, Nasiri was hospitalized, finally ending his long stay at the airport. He later lived in a Paris shelter before returning to the airport in 2022, where he would spend his final days before dying of a heart attack in the same terminal. His unique situation inspired several works, most notably the 2004 film The Terminal, directed by Steven Spielberg and starring Tom Hanks. After losing 125 pounds as a teenager, Josh Peck turned to drugs and alcohol as his new vices. He recently revealed that he was high on a buffet of drugs including cocaine and prescription pills while filming seasons 3 and 4 of Drake and Josh. But Peck soon realized he developed a reputation in Hollywood for being unstable and erratic and has remained sober since 2008. When Brian Peck was on trial for sexually abusing Drake Bell in 2003, there were 41 letters written to the judge by friends, family, and colleagues who were defending Peck's character. Some claim that Peck must have been facing major temptation or had been pressured and pushed beyond belief to have committed any of the abuse. Drake and Josh director Rich Correll and stage manager Beth Correll both allegedly wrote letters in Peck's defense, with Rich saying it would be his pleasure to work with Brian again. In 2016, a man who'd been continuously stalking Miranda Cosgrove apparently plotted to murder her. For 3 days, the stalker had been burying various weapons in Cosgrove's backyard, including knives and a rope. One day, he spent hours pacing around the area and eventually shot at a woman who looked like Miranda. The man then performed self-immolation before turning the gun on himself right in Cosgrove's yard. Miranda has stated that she still lives in the same home but refuses to stay there alone ever since that traumatic incident. Jeanette McCurdy has described the relationship she had with her mother Deborah as both emotionally and sexually abusive. When Jeanette was 3 years old, her mom was diagnosed with breast cancer and underwent multiple surgeries. As a result, Deborah would perform routine vaginal and breast exams on Jeanette and never allowed her to shower alone until she turned 17. McCurdy says that her mother was obsessed with making her a star and introduced her to a calorie restriction by age 11, leading to various eating disorders that Jeanette still struggles with, including anorexia and bulimia. McCurdy says that she refused to appear in the revival series of iCarly, only because she didn't want to be reminded of her mother's abuse during the original show. In 2022, Jeanette released a book entitled I'm Glad My Mom Died 9 years after she passed away from breast cancer. After being a massive Nickelodeon star in the 90s and early 2000s since the age of 10, Amanda Bynes faced a public downfall after retiring from acting in 2009. She began raising eyebrows when she received a DUI upon crashing into a police cruiser in 2012. After being released, she was arrested several more times for DUIs, holding up traffic, and hit and runs until her license was finally suspended. In May of 2013, officers arrested Bynes once again for reckless endangerment, amid reports that she threw a bong out the window of her New York City apartment. A few months later, she was sent to a psychiatric hospital after starting a fire at the end of someone's driveway in California. Soon afterwards, Bynes announced that she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and conservatorship was granted to her parents. The 38-year-old now goes by the name Midge Gardiner and is completely unrecognizable. Before the hangover made him famous, a struggling Zach Galifianakis befriended Mimi Haste, a homeless laundromat attendant who'd been living at the laundromat for years after her marriage ended. After finding success, Zach quietly rented her an apartment, helped furnish it with the help of actress Renee Zellweger, and regularly brought Mimi as his date to Hollywood premieres. Their unlikely friendship became the subject of the 2015 documentary Queen Mimi. Mimi died in 2021 at age 96, having spent her final years surrounded by friends who helped change her life. Some of Michael Jackson's most iconic dance moves were likely inspired by Bob Fosse. Throughout the 1974 film The Little Prince, Fosse performs movements that look strangely familiar. Sliding footwork, sharp kicks, hip isolations, sudden poses, and his signature use of a black hat. Jackson was a known admirer of Fosse, and years later, many of these same mannerisms became staples of Michael's performances. Jackson combined them with influences from James Brown, Fred Astaire, and street dancers to create a style that became unmistakably his own. In 2015, 32-year-old Jonathan Bucklew visited a chiropractor in Georgia for a routine neck adjustment when he suddenly suffered a vertebral artery dissection, triggering a catastrophic brainstem stroke. He was rushed to the hospital, but despite showing classic signs of a stroke, doctors allegedly failed to diagnose him for more than 12 hours. By the time treatment finally began, the damage was irreversible. Bucklew was left with locked-in syndrome, a rare condition in which a person is fully conscious but almost completely paralyzed, unable to move, speak, eat, or breathe on their own, with communication limited to only slight eye movements. He now requires around-the-clock care for virtually every aspect of his daily life. A jury eventually awarded him $75 million, finding that the hospital's delayed diagnosis and treatment caused his permanent disability. The chiropractor was found not liable after calling 911 immediately after Bucklew collapsed, and the claims against him were later dismissed. While filming the 2011 sci-fi western Cowboys and Aliens, Olivia Wilde was very nearly killed during a horseback charge scene. After her horse unexpectedly jumped a 6-foot ditch and threw her to the ground, she landed directly in the path of around 40 galloping horses. Unable to move and convinced she was about to be trampled to death, Wilde later said she was waiting to be turned into pulverized applesauce. Thankfully, co-star Walton Goggins made a split-second decision to turn his horse sideways in front of her, shielding her body and forcing the stampede to split around them. Wilde has said she owes Goggins her life and calls him a real-life hero. In 2010, 24-year-old Emily Jaumain accidentally pricked herself with contaminated forceps while cleaning equipment used to study prion-infected mouse brains. For the next 7 years, she appeared completely healthy, before suddenly developing excruciating nerve pain, anxiety, hallucination, and rapidly worsening neurological decline. Doctors determined the lab accident had given her a fatal prion disease, an incurable brain disorder that slowly destroys the nervous system. Within months of her first symptoms, she died in 2019 at just 31 years old. Her death led to renewed scrutiny of lab safety protocols when handling prions. This was the moment San Diego's 2012 Big Bay Boom fireworks show went catastrophically wrong. The 4th of July display was supposed to last 18 minutes, but a computer glitch triggered all 7,000 shells at once, turning the entire show into a deafening and blinding 25-second barrage of explosions. Miraculously, no one was seriously injured. Investigators later traced the error to a software failure, and the fireworks company accepted full responsibility before providing the following year's $125,000 show free of charge. Exactly 50 years after the United States declared its independence, on July 4, 1826, President John Adams lay dying and uttered his final words, "Thomas Jefferson survives." But little did he know, President Thomas Jefferson had died a few hours earlier that same day, making them the first 2 U.S. presidents to die on the nation's birthday. 5 years later, President James Monroe also died on July 4th, becoming the 3rd president out of the first 5 to die on Independence Day. When President James Madison was nearing death 5 years after that, his doctors did everything to keep him alive until the 4th of July, but Madison refused to be unnecessarily stimulated. He died naturally on June 28th, just 6 days before Independence Day, ending the incredible streak. Best known for playing Xander Harris on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Nicholas Brendon spent years battling alcoholism, addiction, and repeated legal troubles. Over the next decade, he was arrested multiple times on charges including vandalism, theft, prescription fraud, and domestic violence, and publicly admitted to multiple suicide attempts while discussing his struggles on Dr. Phil. In 2021, severe spinal problems left him temporarily paralyzed from the waist down, and he later suffered a heart attack caused by a congenital heart defect. Brendan died from cardiovascular disease in his sleep in 2026 at just 54 years old. In 2003, 46-year-old pizza delivery driver Brian Wells robbed a bank in Pennsylvania while wearing a metal collar bomb locked around his neck, telling police he was forced to do it. Minutes after officers detained him, the bomb exploded before it could be safely removed, killing him instantly on live television. Investigators later concluded that Wells had knowingly participated in the robbery plot, although they also believed he didn't expect the bomb to be real or to actually kill him. Several co-conspirators were later convicted, making the collar bomb case one of America's strangest botched robberies. Just before the 2015 NFL season, Giants defensive end Jason Pierre-Paul severely injured his right hand when a powerful firework exploded prematurely. The blast shattered multiple bones, caused extensive burns, and forced doctors to amputate some of his fingers. But despite the life-changing injury, he returned to the NFL and later won a Super Bowl title with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. In 2015, 22-year-old former Disney World performer Devin Staples, who had previously played Gaston and Goofy at the park, was celebrating the 4th of July with some friends when he attempted to launch a fireworks mortar from the top of his head. The shell exploded instantly, killing him at the scene. His family later said he wasn't trying to do something reckless. He was only pretending to as a joke when the fireworks unexpectedly ignited. This was the moment a single explosion turned Mexico's largest fireworks market into a war zone. The 2016 blast ignited hundreds of tons of fireworks at the San Poblito market in Tultepec, triggering a chain reaction of explosions that leveled most of the market within seconds. At least 42 people were killed and nearly 100 more were injured, with many victims suffering catastrophic burns. Homes surrounding the market were heavily damaged, and several children required treatment for burns covering 90% of their bodies. Despite the disaster, the market was eventually rebuilt, even though Tultepec had already experienced multiple deadly fire explosions in previous years. This koi fish is unsettling thousands of people online because its markings look disturbingly human. The effect is so convincing that many viewers say it triggers the uncanny valley, the same discomfort people feel when something looks almost human but not quite. This fossil is so rare that it only forms in a handful of places on Earth under perfect conditions. This is a coral geode created when an ancient coral colony was slowly replaced by minerals over millions of years while crystals grew inside. The result is one of the rarest and most beautiful fossils ever discovered. For a few minutes each year, the setting sun lines up perfectly with Horsetail Fall in Yosemite, causing the water to glow bright orange and creating the illusion that molten lava is pouring from one of the most famous cliffs in America. Photographers travel from all over the world hoping to witness it, but many leave empty-handed when weather or clouds ruin the effect. When everything finally aligns, the mountain briefly looks like it's erupting. Just a few minutes later, the illusion disappears as quickly as it arrives. A childless Brazilian billionaire reportedly left his entire $1.14 billion fortune to soccer star Neymar despite never meeting him. In his will, the businessman said he identified with Neymar personally, admired his relationship with his father, and believed the athlete was not self-serving, making him the sole heir to a fortune worth over $1 billion. The inheritance is reportedly still subject to court approval. A fox that wandered onto thin ice became trapped when the lake froze around it. After it died, people cut the animal free and left its ice-encased body standing upright as a grim warning marker to keep others from venturing onto the dangerous ice. On D-Day, paratrooper John Steele's parachute became tangled on a church steeple in the middle of a firefight, leaving him suspended helplessly above the battlefield for hours. Unable to escape and surrounded by violent gunfire, he survived by hanging motionless and pretending to be dead while soldiers fought and died beneath him. Today, a mannequin hangs from the same steeple to commemorate his ordeal. Former child star DeVay Chase became famous in the early 2000s for voicing Chihiro in Spirited Away and Lilo in Lilo and Stitch, while also terrifying audiences as Samara in The Ring. She quickly became one of Hollywood's most recognizable young actors, appearing in major films and television shows before largely disappearing from the spotlight. According to recent reports, she spent years struggling with personal problems, financial instability, and declining health. Friends claimed she became increasingly isolated, while reports alleged she'd been living in poverty and even spending time in Los Angeles' Skid Row area in the months before her death. Her boyfriend later said she'd been suffering from severe malnutrition before being hospitalized with meningitis and multiple serious blood infections. The actress reportedly weighed less than 80 pounds by the time she was hospitalized. The infections reportedly progressed to sepsis, causing multiple organ failure, and Chase died on June 16, 2026 at just 35 years old. In 2016, 28-year-old Italian doctoral student Giulio Regeni disappeared in Cairo while researching labor unions for his PhD. 9 days later, his body was found in a roadside ditch bearing extensive signs of prolonged torture, including broken bones, cigarette burns, cuts, bruises, and other injuries inflicted over several days. Italian prosecutors later accused members of Egypt's security services of abducting and torturing him, after allegedly suspecting he was a foreign spy, an accusation Egypt has denied. When Regeni's mother was shown photographs of her son's body, she said she barely recognized him, and described seeing all the evil in the world in his tortured face. During an extreme heat wave in India, temperatures became so intense that the asphalt on this road began to soften and melt. As the surface warped under the heat, the painted crosswalk lines twisted and stretched into bizarre wave-like patterns, creating a scene that looks more like a glitch than a real-life photograph. Photographer Martin LeMay captured this awesome image in England after a weasel leaped onto a woodpecker mid-flight and took a ride on the bird's back. The startled woodpecker eventually escaped after managing to land. Here are some rare photos of the silky anteater, the smallest anteater species on Earth. Found high in the rainforests of Central and South America, they spend nearly their entire lives hidden in the canopy feeding on ants. Their secretive lifestyle and perfect camouflage makes them one of the most difficult rainforest mammals to find, and surprisingly little is known about their behavior in the wild. Is that what I think it is? An incredibly rare, ultra-premium, highly coveted Matsusaka sirloin steak. This is the last known photograph of a quagga, a zebra-like animal that once roamed southern Africa. Unlike modern zebras, quaggas only had stripes on the front half of their bodies, while the rest of their coats were mostly brown. European settlers hunted them heavily throughout the 1800s for their meat and hides, while farmers also killed them to reduce competition with livestock. The final wild quagga is believed to have been shot in the late 1870s, and the last known individual died in captivity at Amsterdam's Artis Zoo in 1883. No one even realized the species had gone extinct until long after the last quagga was dead. In 2022, Fiona Hooker developed a rare pregnancy complication that essentially made her body allergic to her own unborn baby. At 31 weeks pregnant, a few itchy spots around her belly button rapidly spread into agonizing blisters that eventually covered much of her body. Doctors later diagnosed her with pemphigoid gestationis, a rare autoimmune disorder affecting roughly 1 in every 50,000 pregnancies. They believe genes inherited from her son's father caused her immune system to mistake proteins linked to her baby and placenta as a threat, triggering an aggressive attack on her own skin. The pain became so severe that after giving birth, she struggled to even hold her newborn son without agony. Although the blisters eventually subsided, the condition can flare up again with future pregnancies, hormonal changes, or even her menstrual cycle for the rest of her life. In the early 1900s, New Jersey Asylum director Henry Cotton became convinced that mental illness was caused by hidden infections poisoning the brain. To cure his patients, he ordered the removal of teeth, tonsils, stomachs, colons, and reproductive organs, often performing multiple surgeries on the same person. Many patients died from the operations, with some estimates placing the mortality rate at over 45%. Despite the staggering death toll, Cotton spent years promoting the procedures as a medical breakthrough, while dismissing clear evidence that they were killing the very people he claimed to be saving. In 1994, pro wrestler Mick Foley was competing in Germany when a stunt went catastrophically wrong. While performing as Cactus Jack, his head became tangled in the ring ropes as he was thrown over the top rope. As his body fell toward the floor, the ropes violently tore part of his left ear from his head. A large section of his ear landed on the wrestling mat and was picked up by the ref, while Foley simply continued the match, initially unaware that something even happened to his ear. Surgeons later attempted to reattach it, but the procedure was unsuccessful, leaving him permanently disfigured. In 1932, outlaw Clyde Barrow was imprisoned at Texas's notorious Eastham prison farm, where inmates constantly endured brutal labor and violence. Desperate to avoid working in the fields, Barrow amputated 2 of his own toes, only to learn 6 days later that his mother had already secured his release. Barrow ended up walking with a permanent limp for the rest of his life as a result. While at the same prison, he was repeatedly sexually assaulted by another inmate and later retaliated by crushing the man's skull with a metal pipe, though a fellow prisoner serving life eventually claimed responsibility for the killing since he was a fan of Clyde's. In December of 2014, 19-year-old Jessica Chambers was found stumbling along a rural road in Mississippi, with burns covering roughly 98% of her body after someone allegedly doused her in gasoline and set her on fire. Despite suffering catastrophic injuries that had burned much of her skin and severely damaged her airways, she remained conscious long enough to repeatedly try identifying her attacker to first responders. She died hours later in a hospital unit. Investigators spent years debating what name she was trying to say, as her injuries left her speech nearly impossible to understand. Prosecutors accused her former boyfriend Quentin Tellis, but 2 murder trials ended in mistrials, and although Tellis was later convicted of an unrelated killing in Louisiana, no one has ever been convicted for Jessica Chambers' murder. Before becoming a Hollywood star, Tiffany Haddish spent years enduring a childhood of abuse and instability. After a car accident left her mother with severe brain damage, Haddish says her mom became extremely violent, and by age 13, she and her siblings had been removed from the home and placed into foster care. Haddish later revealed she was molested while in foster care, experienced periods of homelessness, and at times lived out of her car. She said that comedy became a survival mechanism, the only thing that kept her from breaking under the trauma she endured while growing up. In 1989, 4-year-old Li Jingwei was abducted from his village in China after a neighbor allegedly lured him away with the promise of seeing cars, a rare sight in the rural area where he lived. He was trafficked hundreds of miles away and grew up never seeing his parents again, relying only on fragmented childhood memories of his home. More than 3 decades later, at age 37, he drew a hand-drawn sketch of the village from memory and posted it online. The map instantly went viral, helping authorities identify his hometown and reunite him with his family 33 years after he was kidnapped. In 2024, 24-year-old Clarissa Street died after paramedics reportedly dismissed her as overreacting, despite her repeatedly saying she couldn't breathe and having a long history of dangerous blood clots. At the hospital, a nurse gave her an oxygen mask that wasn't connected to anything, and Clarissa was left deteriorating in a corridor for nearly an hour while suffering from an undiagnosed pulmonary embolism. The inquest later found staff failed to review her medical history, ignored critical warning signs, and treated her for the wrong condition before she suddenly went into cardiac arrest and died. Medical experts later testified she likely would have survived with basic emergency treatment and an earlier diagnosis. Before playing Frenchie on The Boys, Tomer Capone spent years serving in the Israel Defense Forces, including during the 2006 Lebanon War. He's described taking part in night raids and checkpoint operations in the West Bank, where soldiers would enter homes in the dark, detain suspects, and confront civilians in tense and sometimes violent situations. Capone said years of exposure to violence, fear, and the constant pressure of military operations took a severe psychological toll, eventually culminating in a mental breakdown near the end of his service. Long before he became known for playing a troubled character haunted by his past, Capone was struggling with trauma from real-life experiences he said never fully left him. In 1999, 15-year-old ballet student Rachel Barber was one of Melbourne's most promising young dancers when one day she was lured away by her former babysitter, 19-year-old Carolyn Robertson. For years, Robertson had become obsessively fixated on Rachel, studying her face, copying her handwriting, and telling others she wished she could be her. After convincing Rachel to meet her alone, Robertson strangled the teenager to death and buried her body in a shallow grave in a forest outside of Melbourne. Investigators later uncovered journals revealing that Robertson's obsession had gone far beyond jealousy. She'd spent years fantasizing about taking Rachel's place and living the life she believed should have been hers. Robertson eventually pleaded guilty to murder and was sentenced to 20 years in prison, but she was released on parole in 2008 after serving about 9 years behind bars. In April of 2023, 56-year-old Michael Dale paid an OF model more than $11,000 for an extreme fetish session at his home in Escondido, California. Dale reportedly requested a series of disturbing acts, including being wrapped tightly in plastic like a mummy and having boots glued to his feet. Prosecutors later said the session escalated far beyond what had been agreed to, with Dale eventually found unresponsive with a plastic bag and duct tape over his face, while the woman allegedly filmed parts of the encounter. He was declared brain dead the following day after suffering fatal suffocation. Michaela Rylersdam, a 32-year-old mother of 3, was initially charged with second-degree murder before pleading guilty to involuntary manslaughter in 2026. Built under Saddam Hussein in 1986, Iraq's Mosul Dam is considered one of the most dangerous dams on Earth because it was built atop a foundation of dissolving gypsum rock that constantly erodes beneath it. To keep the dam stable, crews have spent decades continuously pumping grout into the foundation to fill growing voids, with engineers at times injecting dozens of tons of grout per day as part of the around-the-clock maintenance operation. U.S. officials and engineers have warned that if the dam were to catastrophically fail, a massive wall of water could slam into Mosul within hours before surging toward Baghdad, with some worst-case estimates claiming up to 1.5 million people could die in the resulting floods. This photo was taken at the exact moment a phone began shutting down because of low battery. As the device lost power, the camera glitched mid-processing and partially corrupted the image, creating a distorted frame that looks more like a horror game render than a real photograph. This young snow leopard was caught reacting to the sound of a hidden camera trap deep in the mountains. The first image shows the rare predator calmly staring into the lens, but seconds later it appeared to snarl after hearing the camera click. Snow leopards are so elusive they're often called the ghosts of the mountains, and many researchers spend years studying them without ever seeing one in person. Lahaina Noon is a rare solar event where an entire city briefly loses its shadows, making the world look like a video game before everything renders. It happens twice a year in tropical regions like Hawaii, when the sun passes directly overhead at a perfect 90-degree angle, so buildings, objects, and people appear eerily flat as if reality itself hasn't fully rendered yet. Fishermen off the coast of Costa Rica caught something scientists had never documented before, an orange nurse shark. Researchers later confirmed the shark had an extremely rare pigmentation condition called xanthism, combined with traits of albinism, giving it its bright yellow-orange color. Nurse sharks normally rely on dark brown skin to camouflage against the sea floor, making this shark stand out so much that many people initially thought the photos were AI.